The bullet shattered the window of the general store just as Delilah Brooks was reaching for a tin of coffee, and she did not scream, did not gasp, did not even flinch as glass rained down around her shoulders like deadly snow. The year was 1876, and Angels Camp, California had seen its share of violence since the gold rush days, but most women would have at least shown some reaction to nearly being shot. Delilah simply brushed the glass fragments from her dark hair, picked up the coffee tin from where it had fallen, and walked calmly to the counter as if nothing had happened. "You all right, Miss Brooks?" old Mr. Henderson asked from behind the register, his weathered face pale with shock. "I am fine, thank you," Delilah replied, her voice steady as stone. "How much do I owe you?" Outside, men were shouting and running toward the saloon where the shot had originated. Someone was yelling about a card game gone wrong, about accusations of cheating, about honor and satisfaction. Delilah counted out her coins with hands that did not tremble, took her package, and stepped out into the dusty street where the California sun beat down mercilessly, despite it being late October. She was 22 years old and had not cried in front of another human being since she was 14. Since the day her mother died of cholera and her father looked at her with eyes that said she needed to be strong now, needed to be the woman of the house, needed to hold everything together. Her father had passed 2 years ago, leaving her the small ranch on the outskirts of town, and Delilah had managed it alone ever since with the help of one aging ranch hand who was too old to do much more than feed the chickens and mend fences. The ranch was failing. Delilah knew it in her bones the way she knew the weight of unshed tears behind her eyes, the way she knew the ache of loneliness that had become as familiar as breathing. The cattle had gotten sick last spring, and she had lost half her herd. The bank in Sacramento held the note on her land, and the payments were coming due. She had 30 days to come up with $300 or lose everything her family had built, but she did not cry. She never cried. Delilah walked past the commotion at the saloon, past the crowd gathering to see if anyone had been killed, past the sheriff trying to restore order. She climbed into her small wagon, clicked her tongue at her mare, and headed home down the rutted road that led out of Angel's Camp toward the foothills. She did not see the cowboy watching her from the shadow of the livery stable, his dark eyes following her wagon until it disappeared in a cloud of dust. Kade Anderson had been in Angel's Camp for 3 days, and in those 3 days, he had noticed Delilah Brooks exactly 14 times. He had counted, though he would not have admitted it to anyone. There was something about the way she carried herself, straight-backed and proud, that caught his attention. Something about the way she never smiled, never laughed, never seemed to show any emotion at all that made him curious in a way he had not been curious about anything in a long time. Kade was 25, tall and lean with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that tended to fall into his eyes. He had been working ranches since he was 15, drifting from job to job, town to town, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. He had learned early that staying meant caring, and caring meant pain, so he kept moving. He had come to Angel's Camp because he had heard there might be work at one of the bigger spreads outside town, but so far nothing had panned out. He pushed off from the stable wall and headed into the saloon, stepping over broken glass. The man who had fired the gun was being escorted out by the sheriff, still shouting about being cheated. Kade ordered a whiskey and stood at the bar, listening to the gossip around him. "That Brooks woman has got ice in her veins," someone was saying. "Nearly got shot and did not even blink." "Her whole family was like that," another voice replied. "Old man Brooks never showed nothing either. Heard she is about to lose the ranch, though. Bank is calling in the note. Shame. That is good land up there." Cade found himself asking before he could think better of it. The Brooks Ranch hiring, the bartender snorted. She cannot afford to hire anyone, can barely afford to keep the place running as it is. Why do you think old Tom Winters is the only one still working there, and he is near 70 and half blind? Cade nodded and finished his whiskey. He told himself to forget about it, to forget about the woman with the expressionless face and the straight back. He told himself it was none of his business. But the next morning, he saddled his horse and rode out to the Brooks Ranch anyway. The property sat in a little valley with hills rising behind it, golden grass turned brittle by the autumn sun. The house was small but well built, painted white once upon a time but now faded to gray. The barn needed new shingles, and the corral fence was sagging in places. Cade could see maybe 24 cattle grazing in the distance, thin and scattered. Delilah was in the yard, struggling with a water pump that clearly was not cooperating. She had her sleeves rolled up, dark hair tied back with a piece of ribbon, and she was putting her whole weight into working the handle. The pump groaned and coughed but produced nothing. Cade dismounted and cleared his throat. "Morning, madam." Delilah straightened up, her face perfectly composed despite the sweat on her brow. Her eyes were gray, he noticed, like storm clouds. "Can I help you? Actually, I was hoping to help you. Heard you might could use an extra hand around here." "You heard wrong. I am not hiring." "I know, but I am good with pumps. That one sounds like the leather seal is dried out. I could fix it for you." "I did not ask for your help, Mr. Anderson, Kade Anderson." He waited, but she did not offer her first name, though he already knew it. "And I know you did not ask, but I am between jobs right now and I have got time. No charge." Delilah's gray eyes studied him with an intensity that made him feel like she was seeing straight through to whatever he was hiding. "Nothing is free, Mr. Anderson. What do you want?" "Maybe just some water for my horse. Maybe a recommendation if you know anyone who is hiring." She was quiet for a long moment, and Cade could not read anything in her face. Finally, she stepped back from the pump. "The leather seals are in the barn, second shelf. Help yourself." It took him 20 minutes to fix the pump, and when water finally gushed out clear and cold, he thought he saw the faintest flicker of relief cross Delilah's face before it smoothed back into neutrality. "Thank you," she said stiffly. "There is a trough by the barn for your horse." "Appreciate it." Cade should have left then. He should have watered his horse and ridden back to town. Instead, he found himself saying, "That fence on the north corral is about to give out. I could shore it up for you if you have got some spare lumber." "Mr. Anderson, I already told you I cannot afford to hire anyone. And I already told you I am not asking for money. I have got nothing better to do today." "Why?" The question was sharp, suspicious. "Why would you work for free?" Cade shrugged, uncomfortable with the question because he did not really know the answer himself. "Maybe I just do not like seeing things fall apart when they could be fixed." Something shifted in Delilah's expression, too quick to name. "Fine, but just the fence. Then you should go." He worked through the afternoon as the sun arced across the sky, and Delilah went about her chores with the same quiet efficiency she seemed to bring to everything. She did not speak to him again until the fence was mended and he was preparing to leave. "You did good work," she said, and it sounded like the words cost her something. "I do not have much, but I could pay you in eggs, or I have got some preserves." "No need, madam, but if you change your mind about needing help, I am staying at the boarding house in town." Cade rode back to Angel's camp as the sun was setting, painting the hills orange and gold, and he tried to tell himself he had just been killing time, being neighborly, nothing more. But he kept thinking about those gray eyes, and the way Delilah Brooks held herself together like she was afraid one crack would shatter her completely. 3 days passed. Kade found work loading freight wagons, hard labor that paid poorly but kept him busy. He told himself he was not watching for Delilah when he was in town, but somehow he always knew when her wagon appeared on the street, always found himself tracking her movements as she went about her errands with that same impassive expression. On the fourth day, she came to the boarding house. Mrs. Chen, who ran the place, called up the stairs that he had a visitor, and Kade came down to find Delilah standing in the front hall, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Miss Brooks," he said, surprised. "Everything all right? I need help moving some equipment in the barn. Heavy equipment." "Tom cannot do it, his back is too bad, I thought." She stopped, clearly hating having to ask. "I could pay you $1. "I will do it for 50 cents, Kade said, "but I want dinner included." He thought she might refuse, might turn and walk right back out. But instead she nodded once sharply. "Fine. Can you come now?" They rode out to the ranch together, Kade on his horse following her wagon. The equipment in question was an old seed drill that needed to be moved from one end of the barn to the other, and it took both of them pushing and pulling to shift it. Delilah was stronger than she looked, and she did not complain about the work or ask him to do it alone while she watched. When they were finished, she drew water from the pump he had fixed and brought him a cup, along with one for herself. They stood in the yard as the evening settled around them, and for the first time, Kade heard her speak more than a few words at a time. "I am going to lose this place," she said quietly, looking out at the hills. "The bank wants $300 by the end of the month. I have got $97 saved. I have been trying to think of ways to earn the rest, but there is nothing. I could sell the cattle, but they are not worth enough. I could sell everything and it would not be enough." "I am sorry," Kade said and meant it. "I should sell anyway, cut my losses, go to Sacramento or San Francisco, find work as a seamstress or a shop girl." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "But this is my home. My parents are buried on that hill up there. This is all I have left of them." Kade wanted to tell her it would be all right, but he did not believe in lying, and they both knew it would not be all right. "You have got 3 weeks still. Maybe something will come up. Maybe." She did not sound like she believed it. They had dinner in her small kitchen, and Delilah proved to be a good cook, despite the limited supplies she had to work with. They ate mostly in silence, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. When Kade left that evening, riding back to town under a sky full of stars, he realized he did not want to leave Angel's Camp anymore. Did not want to drift on to the next town, the next job, the next nowhere place. He started riding out to the Brooks ranch every day. At first, he made excuses. The barn door needed fixing. The roof had loose shingles. The chickens needed a more secure coop. Delilah never asked him to come, but she never turned him away either, and gradually, the list of things that needed fixing grew shorter while the conversations between them grew longer. Kade learned that Delilah had wanted to be a teacher once, that she loved reading and had a small collection of books she treasured more than anything. He learned that she played piano, though the old upright in her parlor was badly out of tune. He learned that she had a fierce pride that would not let her accept charity, would not let her show weakness, would not let her admit that she was drowning. She learned that Kade had grown up on a ranch in Nevada, that his parents had died in a fire when he was 14, that he had been on his own ever since. She learned that he was good with horses, patient and gentle in a way that made even the most skittish animals trust him. She learned that he read every newspaper he could get his hands on, hungry for knowledge about the world beyond the small towns he drifted through. They did not talk about feelings. They did not acknowledge the way Kade found reasons to stand close to her when they were working, or the way Delilah's face softened almost imperceptibly when she saw him riding up the path each morning. 2 weeks before the bank note was due, Tom Winters fell and broke his hip. The doctor in town said he would be laid up for months, and his daughter came from Stockton to take him home with her. That left Delilah completely alone on the ranch. "Let me stay," Kade said when Tom had been loaded into his daughter's wagon. "I can sleep in the barn." "You need help and you know it. I cannot pay you." "I do not care about money. I have got enough saved to get by. People will talk. An unmarried woman and a man living on the same property. Let them talk. When has their opinion ever mattered to you?" Delilah was quiet for a long time, and Kade could see the war happening behind those gray eyes, pride battling with desperation. "Finally," she said, "all right, but just until I figure things out." Kade moved his few possessions into the barn that evening, making a comfortable enough space in the tack room. It was better than many places he had slept, and it was close to Delilah, which was all that really mattered, even though he was not ready to admit why that was important. They fell into a rhythm over the following days. Kade did the heavy work, tending the cattle, mending everything that could be mended, while Delilah managed the house and the accounts and everything else that needed managing. They ate meals together, worked side by side, and talked about everything except what would happen when the bank came for the ranch. 10 days before the deadline, Delilah rode into town to try one more time to negotiate with the bank. Kade went with her, waiting outside while she went in to plead her case. She was inside for over an hour, and when she came out, her face was as composed as always, but Kade could see something brittle in the set of her shoulders. "They will not budge," she said as they climbed into the wagon. "The manager said if I do not have the full amount by the 1st of November, they will foreclose. He suggested I find a husband quickly, someone with means who could pay the debt." The suggestion made Kade's blood boil, but he kept his voice level. "That is not a solution. No." Delilah picked up the reins, then stopped, staring straight ahead. "I should have cried. I should have begged. Maybe if I had seemed more pitiful, more desperate, he might have given me more time. You should not have to perform grief or fear to be treated with basic decency," Kade said fiercely. "There is nothing wrong with being strong. Is it strength, though?" Her voice was so quiet he almost did not hear her. "Or is it just that I have forgotten how to be anything else?" Kade did not have an answer for that. That night, Kade lay awake in the barn, staring at the dark ceiling and thinking about the money hidden in his saddlebag. He had been saving for years, tucking away every extra dollar, dreaming vaguely of buying his own place someday, of finally stopping the endless drift from town to town. He had almost $400 saved, enough to pay off Delilah's debt with money left over. He could give it to her, should give it to her. But he knew with absolute certainty that she would refuse to take it, that her pride would never allow her to accept that much from him, that she would rather lose everything than be in debt to him. The realization of how much he cared about her hit him like a physical blow. Somewhere in the past few weeks, Delilah Brooks had stopped being a curiosity, a distraction, a way to pass the time. She had become essential. The thought of her losing this place, of her leaving Angel's camp, of never seeing her again, was unbearable. Kade had spent 11 years running from attachment, from caring, from the possibility of loss. He had promised himself after his parents died that he would never let himself need anyone again. But it was too late now. He needed Delilah like he needed air, and the knowledge terrified him. The next morning, he rode into town alone while Delilah was working in the garden. He went to the land office and spent 2 hours going through records, asking questions, gathering information. Then he went to the assayer's office, and finally to the surveyor who had an office above the general store. When he rode back to the ranch in the late afternoon, he found Delilah sitting on the porch steps, and for the first time since he had met her, she looked defeated. Her shoulders were slumped, her hands limp in her lap. "One of the cows is sick," she said without looking up. "The same symptoms as last spring, if it spreads to the rest of the herd." She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Kade sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "I've been doing some research. Did you know there was a silver strike about 15 miles north of here back in '68? Small thing, played out quick, but I got to thinking about your land. Those hills behind the ranch have the same rock formations. So I am saying maybe there is something valuable on your property. Silver or copper or even just good clay for bricks. If there is, you could sell the mineral rights, keep the land." Delilah finally looked at him, and there was something sharp and painful in her eyes. "That is a fantasy. You cannot just find silver because you need it." "No, but you can look. I talked to a surveyor in town. He would do a preliminary survey for $20. If he finds something promising, it would be worth bringing in a proper mining engineer." "I do not have $20 to spend on maybes." "I do." Kade held up his hand when she started to protest. "I know you do not like taking help, but this is not charity. If we find something, you can pay me back. If we do not, then I am out $20 and that is my choice to make." "Why are you doing this?" Delilah's voice cracked just slightly, the first real emotion he had heard from her. "Why do you care so much about what happens to me?" Kade looked at her, at this strong, proud, lonely woman who had somehow cracked through every defense he had built, and he told her the truth. "Because I am falling in love with you. Because the thought of you losing this place, of you leaving, is killing me. Because I rode into Angel's camp planning to stay a few days and move on, and instead, I found a reason to stay forever." Delilah stared at him, and for a moment her face was completely unguarded, showing a kaleidoscope of emotions he had no hope of naming. Then the walls slammed back up and she stood abruptly. "You should not say things like that," she said, her voice tight. "You should not make promises. You do not really know me. I know you well enough. No, you do not. You do not know what I am really like. You do not know all the ways I am broken." She was backing away from him now, wrapping her arms around herself. "You think I am strong, but I am not. I am empty. I have been empty for so long I do not remember what it feels like to be anything else. Delilah, you should go. You should leave before. She stopped, pressing her lips together hard. "Before what?" "Before you let yourself feel something, before you let yourself need someone." Kade stood, wanting to go to her but knowing he should not yet. "I am not going anywhere. I am staying right here, whether you like it or not." Delilah shook her head and fled into the house, the door closing firmly behind her. Kade stood in the yard as the sun set, wondering if he had just ruined everything, wondering if he should have kept his mouth shut. But he had never been good at lying, especially to himself, and the truth was out now. He loved her. He loved her strength and her pride and her loneliness and all the broken pieces she tried so hard to hide. He loved the way she never gave up even when giving up would have been easier. He loved the flash of vulnerability in her eyes before she shut it down. He just had to hope that someday she might love him back. The cow died 2 days later, and thankfully none of the others showed symptoms. The surveyor came out and spent a full day tramping over the hills behind the ranch, taking samples, making notes in a leather journal. He was non-committal when he left, saying he needed to analyze the samples and would send word in a few days. Delilah had barely spoken to Kade since his confession. She was not cold exactly, but she was careful, keeping space between them, avoiding his eyes. It hurt worse than if she had just told him to leave. On the 1st of November, Kade rode into Angel's camp alone again. He went to the bank and withdrew $300 from his account. Then he went to find the manager, a thin man named Curtis who looked at him with undisguised suspicion. I am here about the Brooks Ranch, Kade said. I want to pay off the note. Curtis's eyebrows rose. You want to pay Miss Brooks's debt, are you family? No. Then I am not sure I can accept payment from you. The debt is in her name. The debt is owed to the bank. The bank does not care who pays it as long as it gets paid. Kade put the money on the desk, $300 in neat stacks. Give me a receipt and clear the note. Curtis looked at the money, then at Kade. Does Miss Brooks know you are doing this? No, and you are not going to tell her. You are going to send her the usual notice that the note has been paid, nothing more. Mr. Anderson, I do not think. I do not care what you think, Kade said flatly. Take the money and clear the debt. That is all you need to do. In the end, Curtis took the money, though he shook his head the whole time he was writing out the receipt. Kade folded the paper carefully and put it in his pocket, then walked out of the bank feeling lighter than he had in days. He knew Delilah would be furious when she found out. He knew she would see it as charity, as him trying to control her, as everything she had spent her life trying to avoid. But he also knew that she would not lose her home, and that was worth whatever anger she threw at him. The surveyor's report came the next day, delivered by a boy from town. Kade was in the barn when Delilah came looking for him, the letter clutched in her hand and an expression on her face that he could not read. There is copper, she said, her voice strange. In the hills. The surveyor says it is a significant deposit, enough to be commercially viable. He has already had interest from a mining company in Sacramento. They want to buy the mineral rights for $800. Kade felt a surge of fierce joy. That is incredible. You can pay off the bank and have money left over to rebuild the herd, fix up the place. Yes. Delilah looked down at the letter, then back up at him. You were right. You saved me. The copper was already there. I just suggested looking for it. No, you did more than that. You have been doing more than that since the day you showed up here. She took a shaky breath, and Kade could see her fighting something, see the walls she had built around herself starting to crack. I went to the bank this morning to see about getting an extension, just a few more days until I could finalize things with the mining company. The manager told me the note had already been paid. He would not say who paid it, but I know it was you. Kade started to deny it, then stopped. There was no point in lying. Yes. That was your money, your savings. You had no right. I had every right. It is my money and I can do what I want with it, and what I wanted was to make sure you did not lose your home. But why? Her voice rose, anger and confusion and something else warring in it. Why would you do that? You barely know me. We are not family. We are not anything. You cannot just give someone $300 and expect nothing in return. I do not expect anything in return. I did it because I love you, Delilah. I already told you that. But you should not. She was breathing hard now, the letter crumpling in her fist. You should not love me. I am not worth it. I am not worth $300 or your time or your kindness. I am not worth anything. That is not true. It is true. You do not understand. I am broken inside. When my mother died, I cried for 3 days straight and my father could not stand it. He told me I needed to be strong, needed to hold things together, that we could not both fall apart, so I stopped crying. I stopped letting myself feel anything because feeling hurt too much. And now I do not know how to feel anymore. I do not know how to be what you need. I do not need you to be anything except yourself. But that is the problem, Delilah said, and her voice finally broke. I do not even know who that is anymore. Kade closed the distance between them then, unable to stay away any longer. He reached for her carefully, like she might bolt, and when she did not pull away, he wrapped his arms around her and pulled her close. For a long moment, Delilah stood rigid in his embrace, every muscle tense. Then something inside her gave way, and she collapsed against him, her face pressed into his shoulder. The sound that came out of her was raw and broken, years of suppressed grief and loneliness and fear finally forcing their way out. She cried like the world was ending, great wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. She cried for her mother and her father, for the ranch that had almost been lost, for the weight of holding everything together alone for so long. She cried for the girl she had been before she learned to be hard, and for the woman she was afraid she could never be. And Kade held her through all of it, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring things that were not really words but were meant to comfort anyway. He held her while the sun moved across the sky, while her tears soaked his shirt, while she purged herself of years of unshed grief. When the storm finally passed, Delilah pulled back just enough to look up at him. Her eyes were red and swollen, her face blotchy, and she had never looked more beautiful to him. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I am so sorry. You have got nothing to be sorry for. I have got everything to be sorry for. I have been awful to you. You have been nothing but kind, and I have pushed you away, and—" "Delilah!" Kade cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears still tracking down her cheeks. "Stop apologizing. You have been through hell, and you have been dealing with it the only way you knew how. There is no shame in that. I do not know how to do this," she said. "I do not know how to let someone in. I do not know how to be vulnerable or soft or any of the things you probably want. I do not want you to be anything except honest. That is all. Just be honest with me, and we will figure out the rest together." Delilah searched his face, and whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy something in her. "I think I might be falling in love with you too. It terrifies me, but I think I am." Kade smiled, and it felt like the sun breaking through clouds. "That is a start." He kissed her then, soft and careful, and Delilah kissed him back with a desperate kind of hope that made his heart ache. They stood in the barn, wrapped in each other, and Kade knew that this was what he had been running from all those years. Not pain, but this. The terrifying, wonderful, inevitable act of letting someone matter. They had dinner together that night, and for the first time, Delilah smiled. Really smiled. Not the polite upturn of lips she gave strangers, but a real smile that reached her eyes and transformed her face. They talked about what to do with the money from the mineral rights, about rebuilding the herd and hiring help and maybe even expanding the ranch. "I want to pay you back," Delilah said. "The $300. I know you said you did not want it, but I need to do this. Please." Kade understood. It was about pride, about not being in debt, about maintaining some sense of control. "All right, but there is no rush. Pay me back when you can and not before. Thank you." She reached across the table and took his hand, her fingers threading through his. "For everything. For seeing me when I was trying so hard to be invisible. For staying when I gave you every reason to leave. For loving me even when I did not know how to love you back." "You know how," Kade said quietly. "You have just been too scared to try. But you are not scared anymore, are you?" "I am terrified," Delilah admitted. "But I am tired of being alone. I am tired of being empty. I want to try, Kade. I want to see what it feels like to really live instead of just surviving." They sat together as the evening deepened into night, talking and planning and slowly learning how to be a couple instead of two solitary people circling each other. When Kade finally went out to the barn, Delilah walked with him, and they stood in the yard for a long time, reluctant to separate even for sleep. "Stay in the house," Delilah said suddenly. "There is a spare room upstairs. It does not make sense for you to sleep in the barn. People will talk." "Let them talk." She smiled again, and Kade thought he could spend the rest of his life trying to make her smile like that. "When has their opinion ever mattered to me?" The weeks that followed were like learning a new language. Delilah was learning how to show emotion, how to let herself be vulnerable, how to ask for help when she needed it. It did not come easily to her. And there were days when she retreated back into her old patterns, closing herself off and pushing him away. But each time, Kade waited patiently until she found her way back, and each time it got a little easier. They sold the mineral rights to the mining company in Sacramento, and Delilah paid Kade back his $300 despite his protests. With the money left over, they bought new cattle, fixed up the house and barn, and hired 2 young ranch hands from town. The ranch started to feel alive again, bustling with activity and purpose. In December, Kade asked Delilah to marry him. They were riding the fence line together, checking for damage after a storm, when he just said it without preamble or pretty speeches. "Marry me, Delilah, not because it makes practical sense or because people are talking. Marry me because I love you and I want to spend every day for the rest of my life making you smile." Delilah reined in her horse and looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Yes, but on one condition." "What is that?" "Promise me you will never stop being patient with me. Promise me that when I have bad days, when I close down and forget how to let you in, you will not give up on me." "I promise," Kade said. "As long as you promise the same, because I have got my own demons, my own ways of running when things get hard. We will both have to work at this. I promise." They were married in Angel's Camp on a cold January day in 1877, with half the town in attendance despite the rumors that had swirled around them for months. Delilah wore a dress she had made herself, deep blue like the California sky, and Kade wore the only suit he owned. The ceremony was simple, conducted by a circuit preacher in the small church, and when Kade kissed his bride, he felt like he had finally found the home he had been searching for all those years. They honeymooned at the ranch, snowed in for 3 days by a freak storm that dumped half a foot of white on the valley. They spent those days learning each other in new ways, talking and laughing and making love in front of the fire. Delilah cried sometimes, happy tears that she no longer tried to hide, and Kade held her and knew that this was worth every bit of risk, every moment of fear. By spring, the ranch was thriving. The new cattle were healthy and multiplying, and they had hired a foreman to help manage the growing operation. Kade proved to have a good head for business, and together he and Delilah made decisions about expansion and investment. They were partners in every sense of the word, and the ranch that had been failing when they met was now one of the most successful in the area. In June, Delilah told him she was pregnant. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, and she just took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach and said, "There is a baby, our baby." Kade felt tears spring to his eyes, and he did not try to hide them. "Are you happy?" "I am terrified," Delilah said with a shaky laugh. "But yes, I am happy. I am so happy I do not know what to do with it all." "You do not have to do anything with it, just feel it. That is enough." Their son was born in February of 1878, a healthy boy with dark hair and his mother's gray eyes. They named him James, after Delilah's father, and when the midwife placed him in Delilah's arms, she cried openly, tears of joy and wonder streaming down her face. "He is perfect," she whispered, looking up at Kade with so much love in her eyes it made him ache. "We made something perfect." Kade sat on the bed beside her, wrapping his arm around his wife and son, and felt complete in a way he had never imagined possible. This was what he had been running from all those years, he realized. Not pain, but joy. The terrifying, overwhelming joy of having something, someone, to lose. But he was not running anymore. He was staying. He was home. James was a happy baby, curious and alert, and he turned Delilah into someone Kade barely recognized from the stoic woman he had first met. She laughed more now, smiled freely, cried when she needed to. She had learned to feel again, and while it was not always easy, While she still had days when the old patterns tried to reassert themselves, she was no longer afraid of her own emotions. The ranch continued to prosper. By 1880, they had expanded their holdings, buying up adjacent property and increasing their herd to over 200 head of cattle. They employed 6 ranch hands and a housekeeper, and the Brooks Ranch was known throughout the county as a model operation. In the spring of that year, Delilah gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah. She had Kade's dark eyes and her mother's serious expression, and from the moment she was born, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. "2 babies," Delilah said one evening, nursing Sarah while James played at her feet. "Can you believe we have 2 babies?" "I can believe it," Kade said, watching his family with contentment so deep it was almost painful. "Sometimes I still cannot believe I have you, though. Sometimes I wake up and think this must be a dream. It is not a dream. This is real. We are real." She looked at him over their daughter's dark head. "I never thought I would have this. A family, a home, someone who loves me despite all my broken pieces. I thought I was too damaged, too closed off. You were never damaged. You were just protecting yourself the only way you knew how. Maybe, but I am glad I stopped. I am glad I let you in, even though it scared me to death. Because this, right here, is worth every moment of fear." The years rolled on, marked by the seasons and the growth of their children, and the continued success of the ranch. In 1882, they had a 3rd child, another son they named Thomas after the old ranch hand who had been there when Kade first arrived. In 1885, a 4th child arrived, a daughter named Elizabeth. Through it all, Kade and Delilah built a life together that was rooted in honesty and patience and love. They fought sometimes, because no marriage is perfect, but they always worked through it. Delilah still had moments when she closed down, when the old habit of shutting out emotion reasserted itself. But Kade had learned to recognize the signs and gently coax her back. And Kade still had the urge to run sometimes, when things got too comfortable or too good, but Delilah had learned to see through his restlessness and anchor him. They were not perfect people, and their love was not a perfect love. But it was real, and it was deep, and it was enough. By 1890, James was 12 and already working the ranch alongside his father, learning the business from the ground up. Sarah was 10 and had her mother's love of reading, spending hours in the small library they had built in the house. Thomas was 8 and wild as the wind, always getting into mischief. Elizabeth was 5 and already showing signs of being as strong-willed as her mother. Kade was 39 now, with silver threading through his dark hair, and Delilah was 36, still beautiful but with lines around her eyes that spoke of years of laughter and tears and living fully. They sat together on the porch one evening in late summer, watching their children play in the yard, and Delilah leaned her head on his shoulder. "You ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Staying here, settling down, giving up your freedom?" "Never. Not once." Kade kissed the top of her head. "You are my freedom, Delilah. Before you, I was trapped in a prison of my own making, running from anything that mattered. You set me free." "I think we set each other free," she said. "I was just as trapped as you were, just in a different way. We needed each other. We still do." "Yes. We still do." The sun set over the California hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and Kade Anderson thought about the day he had ridden into Angel's camp with no plan beyond finding work and moving on. He thought about the woman he had seen standing in the general store, not flinching as glass rained down around her, so strong and so alone it had broken his heart. He thought about everything that had happened since, about falling in love and fighting for that love and building a life together. About late nights and early mornings, about births and deaths and all the moments in between. About learning that love was not something to run from but something to run toward, even when it was scary, especially when it was scary. Delilah had refused to cry in front of anyone for 8 long years, holding everything inside until she was empty. But Kade had held her when she finally let go, and in doing so, he had saved her. And she had saved him right back. It was not the story either of them had planned. It was better. As night fell, and the children were called inside for bed, as Kade and Delilah followed them into the house that had become a home, as the ranch settled into peaceful silence around them, they knew that this was what happy endings looked like. Not perfect, not without struggle or pain or fear, but real and lasting and true. They had each other. They had their family. They had built something worth keeping, and that was more than enough. It was everything.